Hello, my name is Kim Overcash. I am with the Central Carolina Community College Humanities Department. I'm an English instructor located at the Pittsboro campus, and today I will be delivering the Writing and Reading Center's Generating Ideas mini session. So this session is divided into two sections. First, we'll provide you with suggestions for getting started on your writing project. The second, we'll talk about brainstorming strategies and approaches to idea development. First, let's talk about suggestions for getting started on your writing project. When you get an assignment, you should do a few things before you even start brainstorming ideas. One, assess the time and effort the project will require. Consider the length of the project and the lead time. By length, I mean, do you have a one-page lab report due, or is it a 10-page research paper? Obviously, that length is going to be directly connected to lead time, meaning chances are really good that one-page lab report is due a week after you actually did the lab, so you've got a week to get it done. A 10-page research paper, you were probably given that, let's say in a fall semester, you were given that paper in September, and it's probably going to come due sometime in December. You have a few more weeks to get that done. You need to manage your time and figure out, when will I sit down and take that 2 hours one afternoon to write the lab report before it's due versus all of the work that's going to go into a research paper. Organize your workflow. Divide your project into steps. So the 1 hour lab report may take 2 hours of your time that you can sit down and do, basically, working off of your knowledge of class notes and what happened in the lab. With a 10-page research paper, you may assess that, well, okay, I've got approximately 10 weeks to complete this. Maybe you need to set aside a chunk of time, 2 hours every week, to work on that project. You may even want to set a schedule. For instance, you may want to say that by the second week, I'll be decided on a project, and by the fourth week, I'll have started my research and be more or less completed with gathering my sources. Lastly, assess your writing situation. Know your audience and understand the written assignment. By saying know your audience, I mean know who else has a stake in this assignment and in this discussion that you're having. Not just your teacher, but also the people who deal with this subject professionally. What do those who agree with you say? What do those who disagree with what you have to say? What will they think? Knowing these objections may very well shape your message and what you have to say. Understand the written assignment. Read your professor's assignment carefully. If they ask you to define something, then be sure that's what you've done. If they've asked you to list examples, then list examples. If you've been told to discuss why, such as the causes of some movement in history, then you really do want to focus on explaining the why behind why something happened and not the effects, perhaps. Let's move on to brainstorming approaches. First, I'm going to define several of these strategies. First is listing. That's when you write a series of items to generate ideas. The second is free writing. This is when you write in sentence-length prose to generate ideas focusing on your topic or your assignment. The third is cubing. This is when you discuss your topic from different angles. That's when you compare it maybe to something, contrast your topic with something. Describe your topic to someone that doesn't know anything about it. Argue for your topic. Introduce it as if you were at a presentation. And then there's clustering. This is when it's a visual brainstorming technique that requires you to write your topic in a circle and then draw radials connecting this central circle to smaller ones with related ideas listed in them. Here's an example of this visual. As you'll see, I'm going to continue to work with my film paper project and my horror movies idea. what I've done is I've put the subject of horror movies in the center circle and then drawn out radials from that initial circle to connect to other circles or objects. I've used squares here, slasher films, sci-fi horror movies, old Universal films. You'll notice that on the slasher films, I've gone even further and developed ideas by listing examples in the circles radiating out from that square, such as slasher films include Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. On the other side of the page, old Universal films, I started to come up with examples as well. And so you'll see radials coming out from that square, noting Dracula and Frankenstein. So this is, if you are visual and you like to draw, clustering might actually be a useful strategy. So now, I'd like to give you examples of each of these. I'm going to go back to my horror movie discussion. Listing, as I said, is writing a series of items to generate ideas. So I'll list examples. Slasher films, old Universal films from the 30s and 40s, paranormal, serial killer, sci-fi, psychological thrillers. These are all subgenres of horror films. And again, free writing. This is when you write in sentence-length prose to generate ideas focusing on your topic or assignment. So let's say that I'm still thinking about my film class and my paper on horror movies. In my previous slide, I generated all of these genre. Let's say I picked the old Universal films. So now I'm just going to free write on those old Universal horror movies. I'm going to write whatever comes to mind. It's in the red text below as an example. The old 30s and 40s Universal films include Todd Browning's Dracula with Bela Lugosi and the Frankenstein and Mummy flicks with Boris Karloff. What's interesting about these films is the black and white technology as well as the inconsistency in time. For example, Rod Steiger explains that viewers can see a peasant woman dressed in 18th century garb and then see a leading lady dressed in a late 20s Hollywood evening gown, all in the same scene. So these are just the things that came to my mind first when I started thinking about old Universal horror movies. Again, cubing is a brainstorming approach that allows you to, as a cube is, it's many-sided, you approach your subject from many sides. You compare it to something, contrast it with something, describe it as if an audience member has never heard of it. You argue for it, or you introduce it as if you're going to introduce it at a presentation. So here, let's go back to my horror movie paper. So, let's say that I'm going to compare my Universal films. Old Universal horror movies are like many old black and white movies. They have poor visual quality due to the less advanced technology, especially compared to today's standards. I'm going to contrast those old horror films. The monsters in those movies are always destroyed in the old horror movies, whereas the monsters often live on in the modern ones. So, we'll describe it now. Again, you want to describe your subject to someone as if you're describing it to someone who knows nothing about it. So, old Universal films focused on traditional monsters, such as vampires, mummies, and werewolves. They were filmed in black and white. Women always needed to be saved by a male hero, unlike the horror films of today, in which women can take care of themselves. Argue for your subject. Modern horror movie fans should watch the old Universal films because audiences should understand the origins of the horror film. The scary movies that we see today wouldn't exist if it weren't for these pioneers of the genre. And then, of course, there's introducing it, as if you were bringing up old Universal horror films at a presentation. Many of you may not have seen the old Universal films, such as Dracula and Frankenstein, but you are familiar with their stars and stories today because these films made such an impact on audiences at their debut and for decades to follow. Of course, I've talked about clustering again. You could do this anywhere along the line in the writing process. So I could take my old Universal films and branch out further ideas from there. Then lastly, There are other creative approaches that you can use to brainstorming. For instance, you can use visuals to evaluate images related to your topic. So here's an example. Old Universal horror films. Go to Google for this one. Just key in maybe the title of an old Universal horror movie, such as Dracula or Frankenstein, or just old horror movies or black and white horror movies. I always like to just use the images results and go to that and ask yourself, gee, what images are popping up and why? And do a quick free write on that. You might be surprised at what ideas are generated just from focusing on visual art. It can be as simple as searching images in Google, or you could actually turn to true art in a museum. There's also using your other senses besides the visuals. There's oral imagery or sound. For instance, you might want to consider the soundtracks to old Universal horror films. This was often classical music, and you could sit and listen to that and consider whatever comes into your head as you are listening to that music. What does the sound evoke for you? So that's a different approach. To think about using your other senses, because I know that writing in and of itself is highly verbal linguistic, but it is not devoid of accessing the other senses. So considering these other approaches may be ways to get you out of a writer's block or a dead end that you didn't foresee. So that's it for my presentation on idea generation. I thank you for your time and wish you the best of luck. Good afternoon.